Hi, welcome. This is Katrina Sargent, owner and creator of Devil Doll Custom Creations. Today we're going to be doing a dual flag non-glittered tumbler. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. Like always, I will have everything linked in the description below. So to start off, you're going to want a prepped and painted white tumbler. Today I'm using an RTIC 30-ounce tumbler. We're going to want to sand the top rim. This just makes it easy so you don't see white when you're doing your red and blue. So now I'm going to measure my tumbler from the top edge, write it down, the bottom edge, write it down, and then the length from top to bottom. Now, if you don't have a curve in your tumbler, it's going to be a little bit easier, but I do. So I'm measuring the top half, which is 4 inches, and then the curve actually is about 1 inch, and then the bottom half. This is just help if you want to cut out a perfect American flag if you weren't doing the dual flag. I'll show you what I'm talking about in 1 second. So I got a distressed American flag off at Etsy. There are some flag rules you need to abide by if you want to do a correct flag. Like there needs to be 50 stars, 13 stripes. The stripes have to start with red and end with red, and there has to be a white under the stars. These are just some rules if you want to make it accurate. So this is what it'll show up when you're cutting it out on Silhouette Studio. You're going to be removing anything that has color. You don't have to cut it out in 2 colors. This is just a stencil. Here's where you're going to need your measurements. The length of the top versus the bottom. I just cut it out and then I will cut away the extra after. I'll show you how I do that in a minute. I use contact paper. Nothing fancy. And I cut this out. I'm going to be doing a reverse weave. So I'm leaving it all together and then I'm adding my transfer sheet, or in my case it's just contact paper, and removing the backing as I go so I don't get any massive folds or bubbles. Once you have that, set that contact backing next to you. You're going to need it in a minute. And then once you have it completely onto your transfer sheet, you're going to remove the vinyl backing. You go slow to make sure it's completely on and kind of roll it off. It's the easiest way. Now, you need to be careful not to touch any of your vinyl because it's sticky, right? So I cut my flag out into a box. If you were doing non-duo flag, you're going to want to cut it out differently. But since I'm covering up the edges, the box was fine. So now I am going to then remove the red and the blue, which I'm painting. So I'm leaving anything that is going to be white. Use that contact backing sheet, the wax side down, so you can put your hands on it and not touch your vinyl. And weed out the blue box and the red stripes. Be careful not to pull up any of the star points, but you're going to have to go back and look through a couple times because there's little pieces that you could have missed. That is the distressed look. So just take your time, get it correct. If you miss a little piece that doesn't get spray painted, guess it's just going to be white. But you want to make sure you have all the pieces that need to be white, like the stars and the white stripes, before you move on to the spray painting. When you're removing the stripes, remember you have to start with the red. So the top stripe is going to be removed, and you're going to leave every other white stripe there because this is a stencil. Wherever the stencil is going to go, it's going to stay white when you spray paint. So just remember, red has to be the top and red has to be the bottom. Once you're done weeding, you're going to put it back on that contact backing, wax side up. Then you're going to trim around the edges. You're going to need to leave space on the top and the bottom for that red stripe on your tumbler. Once you're done trimming, then I add it to my tumbler. So I add it to my tumbler in sections. So I will just remove the contact backing for the stars, add the stars, and then the top half of the stripes, and then move on to the bottom half. This is a distressed American flag, so it doesn't have to be perfect lines. However, this is kind of a hot mess express. It is hard to get it on a curved tumbler. If you're working with a straight tumbler, it is way easier. But this order was for this type of tumbler, so I just had to make it work. You'll see me moving a lot back and forth between hand placing the lines versus wrapping it. You're going to have a lot of folds in your vinyl. That's going to happen when you're trying to wrap a full vinyl wrap like this. It's easy to peel it back and hand lay that. If it's under that section that's going to be the dual flag, you can leave it. You can also tighten up the very bottom edges and the top edges to make a good contact to the tumbler. If there's a fold in the middle of the vinyl, that's fine. As long as it doesn't have a fold where paint can seep under. You can have as many folds in your vinyl as you want. You just want to have good contact on the bottom and the top edge. So you're going to see me struggle a lot with the bottom half. I just have to keep peeling it up, get it to lay where I want it to lay. Since it's a distressed American flag, you can kind of have a little bit more leeway with it. That middle curve is going to be the hardest. So what I just kind of do is I kind of fold the vinyl in the middle and get it to have a good attachment at the top and the bottom edge, and then fold it over. My stencil, I cut out the same size. So I'm going to have to remove some extra once it wraps back over to like where the stars are. If you cut your stencil to the correct measurements we took at the very beginning, you wouldn't be having this little step. But I didn't. I tried to rush this and I had to just trim away the extra once it got onto the tumbler, which wasn't hard to do. So here I am just taking my squeegee and making sure those bottom edges have good contact with the tumbler so I don't have paint leaking where my white sections should be. Now the hardest part is done. Now we're moving on to painting. So now you need to cover up the parts that are not being painted blue, which is the rest of the tumbler besides the stars. So I use cling wrap to kind of wrap my tumbler and then take painter's tape. To get a distressed edge, I take painter's tape and rip it in half, and then you're going to add that distressed jagged edge where the blue and the red is going to meet. This just kind of adds a little extra so it's not just a straight line. If you want a straight line of the tape, tape it like that. Make sure everything is covered. You don't want blue first. So I always tape the edges just to make sure it is not going to leak under my cling wrap. This is the blue I use, deep blue from Rust-Oleum. Sorry about my spray tint, it is well used. So you're going to do quick burst along those edges. It's better to do 2 coats than to do too heavy and have drips. Once this dries, then you're going to cover up the blue section with cling wrap, and then I took a distressed Tape again and go along those edges. Tape off where you don't want the red to be. And then I spray paint it with Candy Apple from Rust-Oleum. And then you're just going to do light dusting. I do 2 coats on these just to make sure it's completely covered. And then I let this sit about 24 hours to fully dry before removing my vinyl. I like to remove as much vinyl as I can just with peeling up. If you kind of peel something up and kind of wiggle it as it goes, it will release from the edges. The stars are going to be a little bit more challenging and it takes a little bit more finesse. Try not to scratch anywhere that's red or blue because it's hard to touch back up. Also, you don't want to dig too deep when you're removing the vinyl to dig into the white paint. But if you do, you can always distress that area with a little bit more brown paint in the next section. On the stars, I take a pin tool and I go from the top point, kind of get that to move up, and then wiggle the rest of the star down. If you try to weed these before your paint is 100% dry, you can peel up the paint around the edges and not get a crisp line. This is why I wait 24 hours, sometimes longer, to weed the vinyl. And then once you have everything weeded, if you have any bleed overs, I take a craft knife and kind of lightly scratch away any red areas. Don't scratch too deep. You don't want any stainless steel showing, but I just kind of lightly remove it. You remember when I said you need to know if you're doing a dual flag versus just the American flag? Right here, if you are doing just the distressed American flag, you're going to need to cut out your vinyl a little different so it has like a tattered edge and not this straight cut since I'm doing a dual flag. Once you are done weeding, epoxy it or Brite tone and then let it cure for about 12 to 24 hours before you move on to distressing. This is a little bit of brown spray paint, some acetone, some alcohol, a rag, a chip brush, and a couple different colors of brown acrylic paint. This is just going to add a little different dimensions to your distressing than just doing one or the other. If you like one look over the other, do that. So I am just going to randomly spray paint a few spots of this brown spray paint and then let it not fully dry, but kind of dry. If your spray paint completely dries, you can still remove it and distress it. You'll just have to use a little bit more elbow grease. So I'm just taking my chip brush with a little bit of acrylic paint on it and brushing it in random spots just to give it a little dimension of a well-used, well-distressed flag. Once I'm happy with where the paint is, I take a little bit of acetone on a rag, and sometimes you can kind of pat to see how dry your spray paint is. See, mine was not very dry, so my rag took off a lot of that spray paint. Then I just kind of work around with my dry rag and then a little bit of acetone here and there just to kind of break up any harsh edges I see. I'm just trying to get it to look well used and well worn American flag. This is your preference on how dirty you want it to look. If you are using CrystaLac Brite tone, not epoxy, which I actually am on this tumbler, you need to go sparsely with the rubbing alcohol and the acetone. It will remove the Brite tone under and get into your bottom paints. So just use a little bit more elbow grease and a little bit less of the alcohol or acetone. This includes on the next side. So now I'm just kind of seeing where I want to put my next flag. Once I am happy with the way the American flag looks, I'm going to tape it off the same way I did earlier. Once everything is taped off, I'm going to spray paint it white, 1 to 2 coats, and then this yellow from Rust-Oleum, and then let it dry. If you're using Brite tone, you need to let everything degas 48 hours before you move on. So now we are going to distress the edge with some alcohol and some acetone with a rag, just to give it a little bit more tattered edge look. If you're using Brite tone, be careful not to go too deep because you will remove that red spray paint. You can remove some of your distressing browns from your previous distressing. You can fix those once you get this happy. So I just kind of add a little tattered places here and there. I then add Tim Holtz alcohol inks in honeycomb and dandelion, so 2 different colors of yellow, to add onto those edges that you remove and becomes white. If I would have just taped this tumbler off and only did half red, half blue, and then half yellow from the very beginning, I wouldn't have to worry about this white showing so much, but I didn't. It still works. If you want to skip this step and just make it a split tumbler from the very beginning, that's what you're going to want to do. I take some makeup sponges and add my inks to random areas just to cover up those edges. You can add the browns. I use teakwood and caramel from Tim Holtz to add the dirty look on here. It's very forgiving. You just kind of build layers, add a little bit, take a little bit off. If you want, use some rubbing alcohol to remove stuff. You just want it to kind of get it to look tattered and worn and as dirty as you want. This is completely up to you. If you want to do the same technique we did on the American flag, you can just do that technique over the entire tumbler. I personally like the look of it being 2 separate, but it's your choice. I like to take baby wipes to kind of blend in a few areas. I don't have anything on these baby wipes at this moment to kind of just get the edges cleaned up. It removes very little. If you do more elbow grease, you're going to remove more. When you are ready to do a little bit more removing, like if you have a yellow around this edge like I did, put a little bit of alcohol or acetone on it. Make sure you dab it off before you touch your tumbler because it's going to remove a lot, and then you're going to be fixing that mistake. I will say you need to change out your gloves and change out your baby wipes often because you will get this bleed over if you don't and you've touched your tumbler. Learn from my mistakes. Just that yellow's hard to take off that white. So here I'm just using a Q-tip and some acetone. It will remove the brown from underneath. I do touch that up with a little bit of chip brush with some brown on it, just to kind of blend it back together. But I'm just trying to get that yellow contained. I did not change out my baby wipe enough, so it bled into the stripes. I let my inks dry overnight before I epoxy or Brite tone. Once that is cured, you're going to move on to the water slide. I printed it on clear water slide paper. This is my size. You're going to need to measure your tumbler and see what size you need to add to your tumbler. Print it off. If you have an inkjet printer, you're going to have to seal it. There are many videos on YouTube on how to do this. So then you're going to sand your rim again. You did this earlier, so you shouldn't see any white, just stainless steel and then the top colors. You have to have a stainless steel edge on epoxy or Brite tone so it adheres to the stainless steel, not the top where your lid is. If you are going to do a water slide, do not sand where your water slide's going. It will show the sand marks. If you have any spillover or on the top where the lid goes or inside your tumbler, you're going to want to take a sharp craft knife and trim that away. You also can take a baby wipe when it's on the turner and run it along that edge if you don't want to do this step. Be careful with your craft knife. I've seen some horror stories of people slipping and slicing into their hands. Just be careful. You're going to need a container of water, lukewarm or room temperature, your water slide trimmed fairly close to your decal. I have these cotton gloves that I love. You can use a coffee filter or a cotton rag if you would like. So you're going to add your water slide into the water. Do not force your water slide before it's ready. It will release from the backing when it's ready. If you try to force it, you can ruin your water slide. It should slide off that easy. And then I work from the bottom up. Make sure you have a little bit of water on your tumbler before you try to remove the backing. And then you're just going to kind of angle it and get it centered while you're trying to rub any water or air that could be trapped behind your water slide and your tumbler. If you have any folding, you can take a craft knife and kind of refold that back correct. You're going to want it as straight as possible before it dries. Once it dries, you won't be able to reposition it. I let my water slides dry for a couple hours. If you are using Brite tone, you let it dry a couple more hours. If you have any spray paint that is on your rim or inside your tumbler, I use a magic eraser and I add a little bit of acetone on it to remove the paint. And then if I need any spots, I use a little bit of alcohol onto the magic eraser. It works like a charm. And then you're just epoxy and Brite tone like normal until you don't feel any lumps or bumps or it's glass smooth. I hope everyone enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, please write them in the comments. I do write back. As a proud Army wife, it was a pleasure for me to share this tutorial with you guys. I love making these. My husband loves these. Any males I have sold to have loved them. Please like, share, subscribe. It means the world to me. Thank you everyone for your continued support for me and my channel.